What would make an experienced ICU nurse quit the hospital just 1 week after her very first shift? In today's story, you'll meet Elise Harper and discover what she went through on her first night at Mercy General's ICU, an old silent hospital with one room no one ever wanted to enter. But before we begin, subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Leave a like and comment below where you're listening from. Now take a deep breath and watch until the end, if you dare. There are moments in a person's life when they realize that everything they thought they understood about the nature of life and death was merely the surface of something far deeper and more disturbing. I have carried such a moment with me for 8 months now, and only today, as I sit in my new position at St. Mary's General Hospital 300 miles away from Mercy General, have I found the courage to put these events into words. My name is Elise Harper, and I am a registered nurse with 6 years of experience in critical care. Before that night in March, I had always prided myself on my rational approach to medicine, my ability to remain calm under pressure, and my unwavering dedication to patient care. I had seen death many times, had held the hands of the dying, had witnessed the final moments of countless souls departing this world. I thought I understood the boundary between life and death, between the natural and the inexplicable. I was wrong. The events I am about to describe took place during my first night shift in the intensive care unit at Mercy General Hospital, a 150-year-old institution located in the heart of downtown Millfield. I had recently transferred there from the cardiac unit at Regional Medical Center, seeking new challenges and the opportunity to work in one of the most prestigious ICUs in the state. What I didn't know was that Mercy General also had a reputation for something else entirely. The hospital was an imposing Victorian structure built in 1873, with tall windows that seemed to watch over the city like ancient eyes. The ICU was located in the oldest part of the hospital, on the 4th floor of the original building. The unit consisted of 12 private rooms arranged around a central nursing station, with thick walls that seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. I should have paid more attention to the silence. My first shift was scheduled for March 15th, a Tuesday night that began like any other. I arrived at 6:45 p.m. for the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. The day nurse, Margaret Torres, was a woman in her 50s who had worked at Mercy General for over 20 years. She seemed competent and professional, but I noticed something in her demeanor that struck me as unusual, a kind of nervous energy, as if she was eager to leave. "You'll be working with Dr. Harrison tonight," she told me as we walked through the unit. "He's been here almost as long as I have. Good doctor, very thorough, but he has some particular ways of doing things." The patient census that night was relatively light, 8 patients in a 12-bed unit. Margaret gave me a report on each one, but it was when we reached room 407 that I noticed her voice change, becoming more formal, more distant. "Room 407 is currently empty," she said, not looking at the closed door. "It's been empty for 3 weeks now. Dr. Harrison prefers to keep it that way unless we're at full capacity." "Why?" I asked. Margaret hesitated. "There have been complications with that room. Equipment malfunctions mostly." We continued the tour, and Margaret introduced me to the other staff members. Dr. Harrison, a tall, thin man in his early 60s with graying hair and intense blue eyes. James Rodriguez, a respiratory therapist, and Patricia Williams, a nursing assistant. What struck me most about the team was their obvious competence, but also an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't quite identify. Margaret finished her report at exactly 7 p.m. and left with unusual haste. Dr. Harrison approached the nursing station at 7:30 p.m., carrying a stack of charts. "Elise, isn't it?" he said. "Margaret tells me you have excellent credentials." "Thank you, Dr. Harrison. I'm looking forward to working here." He nodded, then his expression grew serious. "There are some particular aspects of working here that you should be aware of. Room 407. Margaret mentioned it's currently empty. I prefer to keep it that way unless absolutely necessary. If we do need to use it, I want you to follow specific protocols." He handed me a laminated card with unusual procedures. All equipment in the room was to be checked every 2 hours, even if empty. Any alarms from room 407 were to be investigated by 2 staff members, never alone. If a patient was assigned there, vital signs were to be documented every 15 minutes. And most strangely, a digital recorder was to be placed in the room and checked each morning for unusual sounds. "Dr. Harrison, these protocols seem quite specific. Has there been a particular problem with this room?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Elise, in 35 years of practicing medicine, I've learned that there are aspects of this profession that can't be explained by textbooks. This hospital is old, it has a long history, and sometimes that history influences the present." Before I could ask what he meant, an alarm sounded from room 403. We responded immediately, and I found myself thrown into the demanding rhythm of ICU nursing. For the next 2 hours, I was fully occupied with patient care. It wasn't until nearly 10 p.m. that I had a chance to really observe the unit. As the night deepened, I began to notice things that seemed slightly off. The first thing was the temperature. Despite the hospital's modern climate control, the ICU seemed to have cold spots, particularly in front of room 407. Every time I walked past that door, I felt a distinct chill. The second thing was the behavior of the other staff members. James Rodriguez made his rounds with meticulous care, but always paused before entering any room, as if listening for something. Patricia Williams was efficient and professional, but had a habit of glancing over her shoulder when she thought no one was watching. Most significantly, I noticed Dr. Harrison's routine. Every hour on the hour, he would walk the entire unit, but his route always ended at room 407, where he would stand outside the closed door for exactly 60 seconds before returning to the nursing station. At 11:47 p.m., I decided to ask Patricia about these observations. I found her in the break room, sitting alone with a cup of tea. "Patricia, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've noticed some unusual routines here tonight. Is there something I should know about this unit?" She looked at me for a long moment. "You're very observant. Most new nurses don't pick up on things so quickly." "Pick up on what things?" Patricia glanced toward the door, ensuring we were alone. "Elise, how much do you know about the history of this hospital?" "Just the basics. Built in 1873, one of the oldest hospitals in the state." "That's the official history, but there's more to it than that. Room 407 has a history. Patients who are assigned there, they report things, they see things, they hear things." "What kind of things?" "Voices calling their names, shadows moving when no one else is in the room, the feeling that someone is standing beside their bed, watching them." She paused. 3 weeks ago, we had a patient in that room, a 45-year-old woman recovering from routine surgery. On her second night, she started screaming at 3:17 a.m., claiming that a woman in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform was trying to give her an injection. "Hallucinations aren't uncommon in ICU patients," I said. "That's what we thought. But when we reviewed the security footage, we saw the patient's room door opening and closing by itself at exactly 3:17 a.m. No one entered or left the room, but the door clearly moved, and the temperature sensors recorded a drop of 15 degrees in 2 minutes. Before I could respond, Dr. Harrison's voice came over the intercom. "Elise, could you come to the nursing station, please?" I found Dr. Harrison looking troubled. "We're going to be receiving a patient in about 30 minutes, a 52-year-old man, post-operative complications from gallbladder surgery. He's stable, but he'll need close monitoring." "Which room?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "Room 407. We're at capacity everywhere else." I spent the next 20 minutes preparing room 407. The room was identical to the others, but as I worked, I became increasingly aware of the atmosphere. The room felt heavier somehow, and the temperature was noticeably cooler. Most unsettling was the silence. Room 407 seemed to absorb sound, creating a pocket of quiet that felt almost oppressive. I was checking the cardiac monitor when I heard it for the first time. A soft tapping, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from within the walls. I paused, listening carefully, but the sound stopped as soon as I focused on it. The patient, Mr. David Kellerman, arrived at 12:45 a.m. He was conscious and alert, though clearly uncomfortable from his recent surgery. As we transferred him to the bed, he seemed like any other post-operative patient. It was only after we had completed the admission process that I noticed his behavior change. He kept glancing toward the corner of the room near the window. "Is everything all right, Mr. Kellerman?" I asked. "There's someone standing over there," he said, pointing to the corner. "An older woman in a white dress. She's been watching us since you brought me in." I looked toward the corner, seeing nothing but shadows. "Mr. Kellerman, you've just had surgery and you're on pain medication. It's not uncommon to see things that aren't really there." He shook his head. "I know what medication can do, nurse. I'm a pharmacist. I understand the effects of drugs on perception. But I'm telling you, there's a woman standing right there, and she looks very sad." As I worked, Mr. Kellerman continued to stare at the corner, occasionally nodding as if responding to someone speaking to him. His vital signs were stable, his pain was well controlled, and there was no medical reason for hallucinations. At 1:15 a.m., I left to complete my rounds. When I returned 30 minutes later, I found him sitting up in bed, clearly agitated. "She's trying to tell me something," he said. "The woman in the corner. She keeps pointing to the wall behind my bed and saying something I can't understand." I looked at the wall he indicated. It was blank, except for standard medical equipment. "Mr. Kellerman, there's no one in this room except you and me." "Look at the temperature," he said, pointing to the digital display. "It's dropped 10 degrees since you left." I checked the reading and felt my breath catch. The room temperature had dropped from 72 to 62 degrees. The thermostat showed it was set to 72 degrees, and the heating system was running normally. "It's not the heating system," Mr. Kellerman said quietly. "It's her. Every time she moves closer to the bed, the temperature drops." I heard it again, the soft, rhythmic tapping from within the walls. This time, Mr. Kellerman heard it too. "That's been going on for the past 10 minutes. It sounds like someone knocking, like they're trying to get out." I stood in the center of the room, listening to the tapping and watching the temperature display continue to drop. Every rational part of my mind searched for logical explanations, but standing there in that cold room, I began to understand why room 407 had such a troubling reputation. "Mr. Kellerman, I'm going to call Dr. Harrison. I think we should consider moving you to a different room." "Thank you," he said, relief evident in his voice. Dr. Harrison arrived within minutes. The temperature had returned to normal, the tapping had stopped, and Mr. Kellerman appeared calmer, though he continued to glance at the corner. Dr. Harrison examined the patient thoroughly and reviewed the monitor readings. Everything appeared normal except for the documented temperature fluctuation. "Mr. Kellerman, we're going to move you to room 403. As we prepared to transfer him, Mr. Kellerman grabbed my arm. "Nurse, before we leave, look at the wall behind the bed. Really look at it." I approached the wall. At first glance, it appeared normal, but as I examined it more closely, I noticed something unusual. The paint in one section, about 3 feet square, was slightly different in color and texture, as if it had been patched and repainted. "Dr. Harrison, could you look at this?" He joined me at the wall, running his hand over the surface. "This section has definitely been repaired, probably years ago, judging by the way the paint has aged." We completed the transfer of Mr. Kellerman to room 403, where he immediately seemed more comfortable. By 3 a.m., he was sleeping peacefully. I returned to the nursing station, but found it difficult to concentrate. Dr. Harrison appeared at 3:17 a.m., carrying a thick folder. "Elise, I think it's time you knew the full story about room 407. He opened the folder, revealing years of documentation, incident reports, patient statements, temperature logs, and photographs. I've been keeping records of unusual events in that room for over 15 years. What happened tonight is not an isolated incident. I looked through the documents, seeing a pattern of similar reports. Patients reporting visual and auditory hallucinations, unexplained temperature fluctuations, equipment malfunctions, and a consistent description of a woman in white. Dr. Harrison, have you ever investigated the history of that specific room? I've tried, but the hospital's records from the early years are incomplete. What I do know is that during the 1918 influenza pandemic, the fourth floor was converted into an isolation ward for the most severe cases. He pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping dated October 1918. The headline read, "Local nurse dies in service to flu victims." Her name was Grace Holloway. She was 28 years old, had been working at the hospital for 6 years. She contracted influenza while caring for patients in the isolation ward and died after 3 days of illness. I studied the photograph accompanying the article. It showed a young woman in the white uniform typical of nurses from that era, with dark hair and serious, compassionate eyes. The article mentions that she died in room 407, but there's more to the story. He pulled out another document, handwritten and much older. This is from the personal journal of Dr. Edmund Hartley, who was the chief of medicine during the pandemic. I read the entry dated October 15, 1918. Grace Holloway died this morning after a courageous battle with the influenza. In her final hours, she was delirious with fever, repeatedly saying that she had to tell someone something important, that there was something hidden that needed to be found. She died clutching a piece of paper with writing that was too faded to read. I have decided to seal her personal effects in the wall of her room as a memorial to her service. I looked up at Dr. Harrison. The patched section of wall in room 407 contains Grace Holloway's personal effects, sealed there over a century ago. And based on the pattern of incidents in that room, I believe she's been trying to communicate something ever since. What do you think she's trying to say? Dr. Harrison closed the folder. I don't know, but I think it's time we found out. The rest of the night passed quietly, but I found myself unable to stop thinking about Grace Holloway and the mystery of room 407. As dawn approached, Dr. Harrison asked me a question that would change everything. Elise, would you be willing to help me investigate this further, to try to understand what Grace Holloway has been trying to communicate? Despite my exhaustion, despite the unsettling nature of what I had experienced, I found myself nodding. Yes, I think we owe it to her, and to future patients, to find out what she's trying to tell us. Good. Meet me here tomorrow night at 11 p.m. We're going to open that wall. The following evening, I arrived early to find Dr. Harrison waiting with James Rodriguez and Patricia Williams. I asked them to join us, Dr. Harrison explained. If we're going to do this, we should do it properly. Dr. Harrison had spent the day researching Grace Holloway's background and had retrieved additional documents from the hospital archives. Among them was a letter from Grace's sister, written 6 months after Grace's death, asking about Grace's personal effects, specifically a journal that Grace had been keeping during the pandemic. The letter mentioned that Grace had been deeply troubled by something she had discovered in the weeks before her death and had intended to report her concerns to the proper authorities. More disturbing was a letter from Dr. Hartley to the hospital board, recommending that room 407 be permanently sealed because Grace's personal effects contained observations and allegations that could be damaging to the hospital's reputation. At 11:30 p.m., we made our way to room 407. Dr. Harrison had brought tools from the maintenance department. As we stood before the patched section of wall, I felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. As Dr. Harrison began to remove the outer layer of drywall, the temperature immediately began to drop. More significantly, the cardiac monitor, despite no patient being connected, began displaying a heart rhythm. "It's showing a normal sinus rhythm," James observed. "That's impossible." As Dr. Harrison continued to work, The cardiac monitor began to show irregularities, as if we were watching someone's heart respond to stress or excitement. Dr. Harrison broke through the final layer of plaster, revealing a small cavity containing a wooden box wrapped in oiled cloth. As soon as it was removed, the cardiac monitor returned to flatline and the temperature began to rise. Inside the box, we found a leather-bound journal, a silver locket, a fountain pen, and a folded letter. Dr. Harrison opened the journal and began reading Grace's entries from September 1918. What we discovered was horrifying. Grace had documented a systematic pattern of experimental treatments being administered to influenza patients without their knowledge or consent. Dr. Morrison, working with Dr. Hartley's approval, had been using the pandemic as an opportunity to test unproven remedies on vulnerable patients. Grace's final entry, dated October 13, 1918, was the most damning. I can no longer remain silent about what I have witnessed. Dr. Morrison's experimental treatments have killed at least 30 patients that I have documented. These were people who might have survived with proper care, but instead they were used as test subjects for treatments that Dr. Morrison knew were dangerous. I have compiled detailed records of each case. I intend to present this evidence to the hospital board and to the state medical board. I have hidden copies of my documentation in case something happens to me. Dr. Morrison has become suspicious of my questions, and I fear he may try to silence me. The folded letter was addressed to the state medical board, dated October 14, 1918, the day before Grace's death. It was a formal complaint detailing the experimental treatments and requesting an immediate investigation. "She was murdered," Patricia said quietly. "They gave her the influenza deliberately to silence her." "She died trying to protect patients," I said, "and Dr. Hartley made sure her evidence was buried with her." Dr. Harrison carefully placed all the items back in the box. "We do what Grace couldn't do. We tell her story. We make sure the truth is known." Over the next several hours, we documented everything we had found. Dr. Harrison contacted the hospital's current chief of staff, explaining our discovery and requesting a meeting with the board of directors. As dawn approached, we returned Grace's belongings to room 407, but this time we placed them in a position of honor on the windowsill, where they could be seen and remembered. The change in the room was immediate and profound. The oppressive atmosphere that had characterized room 407 for decades was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and tranquility. 3 weeks later, Mercy General Hospital held a ceremony to honor Grace Holloway's memory and acknowledge the injustices committed during the 1918 pandemic. A plaque was installed in room 407 telling her story and recognizing her courage. The room was renamed the Grace Holloway Memorial Room. The hospital also established the Grace Holloway Foundation for Medical Ethics, and her journal was donated to the medical school's library as a teaching tool. As for me, I continued working at Mercy General, but my experience fundamentally changed my understanding of what it means to be a nurse. I learned that our profession carries not only the responsibility to provide excellent patient care, but also the obligation to speak up when we witness wrongdoing. I often work in the Grace Holloway Memorial Room now, and I find it to be one of the most peaceful spaces in the hospital. Patients report feeling comforted and protected, as if someone is watching over them with compassion. Sometimes, late at night, I think I catch a glimpse of a figure in white moving through the corridors. Not frightening, but reassuring, like a guardian angel making her rounds. I believe it's Grace, finally at peace, continuing her mission of caring for patients. The events of that night taught me that the boundary between life and death is not as absolute as we might think, and that sometimes the dead have important messages for the living. Grace Holloway waited over a century to tell her story, to ensure that the truth was finally revealed. Her story reminds us that healthcare is about honoring the trust that patients place in us, about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult, and about remembering that every life has value and dignity. The darkest thing I witnessed that night was not a supernatural manifestation. It was the realization that people in positions of trust had deliberately harmed vulnerable patients and covered up their crimes. But I also witnessed something beautiful. the power of truth to heal old wounds, and the enduring strength of the human spirit to seek justice even beyond death. Grace Holloway's story is now part of Mercy General's official history, taught to every new employee and remembered in every patient interaction. Her legacy ensures that the mistakes of the past are not repeated and that the principles she died defending continue to guide our profession. In the end, my first night as an ICU nurse taught me that being a healthcare professional means being part of something larger than ourselves, a tradition of service, compassion, and ethical responsibility. Grace Holloway showed me that this tradition is worth protecting, worth fighting for, and worth dying for if necessary. Her story is a reminder that in healthcare, the truth may be buried for a time, but it will always find a way to surface. And when it does, it has the power to heal not only the living, but also the dead who have been waiting patiently for justice to be served. The Grace Holloway Memorial Room stands as a testament to the courage of one nurse who refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. Every time I walk past that room, I remember Grace's words from her final journal entry. These patients trusted us with their lives, and we betrayed that trust. It's a reminder that trust, once broken, can take generations to rebuild, but that the effort to rebuild it is always worthwhile. I have shared Grace's story with nursing students, with new employees, and with anyone who will listen. Her experience serves as a powerful reminder that our profession requires not just clinical competence, but moral courage. We must be willing to question authority when patient safety is at stake, to document concerns thoroughly, and to speak up even when it's uncomfortable or dangerous to do so. The investigation that followed our discovery revealed that Dr. Morrison's experimental treatments during the 1918 pandemic were part of a broader pattern of unethical medical research that was unfortunately common in that era. Patients were often used as test subjects without their knowledge or consent, particularly those who were poor, elderly, or otherwise vulnerable. Grace Holloway's documentation provided crucial historical evidence of these practices and helped the medical community better understand the importance of informed consent and ethical oversight in medical research. Her story also highlighted the critical role that nurses play in patient advocacy. As the healthcare professionals who spend the most time with patients, nurses are often the first to notice when something is wrong, when treatments aren't working as expected, or when patients are being harmed. Grace's courage in documenting and reporting her concerns, even at great personal risk, exemplifies the highest ideals of nursing practice. The Grace Holloway Foundation for Medical Ethics has grown significantly since its establishment. It now provides funding for research into patient advocacy, supports whistleblower protections for healthcare workers, and offers educational programs on medical ethics. The foundation has also established an annual award recognizing healthcare professionals who demonstrate exceptional courage in protecting patient rights and safety. Grace's journal has become one of the most requested items in the medical school's library. Students studying medical ethics, nursing history, and patient advocacy regularly reference her detailed documentation of the events during the 1918 pandemic. Her meticulous record-keeping serves as a model for how healthcare professionals should document concerns about patient care and safety. The room that once harbored such dark secrets has been transformed into a place of healing and hope. Patients who stay in the Grace Holloway Memorial Room often comment on the peaceful atmosphere and the sense of being protected and cared for. Many report having unusually restful sleep and feeling a sense of comfort that they can't quite explain. The nursing staff has also noticed changes in their own practice since Grace's story became known. There's a renewed emphasis on patient advocacy, a greater willingness to question orders that don't seem right, and a stronger sense of professional responsibility. Grace's legacy has created a culture where speaking up for patients is not just encouraged, but expected. I often reflect on the events of that night and the lessons they taught me about the nature of justice, truth, and professional responsibility. Grace Holloway's spirit was trapped not by supernatural forces, but by the weight of untold truth and unacknowledged injustice. Her restlessness was not malevolent, but desperate, the desperation of someone who had witnessed terrible wrongs and died before she could set them right. The manifestations in room 407 The temperature drops, the equipment malfunctions, the apparitions were not random hauntings, but purposeful communications. Grace was trying to draw attention to the hidden evidence of the crimes she had documented, to ensure that the truth would eventually come to light. Her persistence across more than a century demonstrates the power of moral conviction to transcend even death itself. In my current position at St. Mary's General Hospital, I carry Grace's story with me every day. When I encounter situations that trouble me, when I see practices that don't seem right, when I feel pressure to remain silent about concerns, I think of Grace Holloway and her unwavering commitment to patient welfare. Her example gives me the courage to speak up, to ask difficult questions, and to put patient safety above all other considerations. The medical profession has come a long way since 1918. We now have institutional review boards to oversee research, informed consent procedures to protect patients, and whistleblower protections for healthcare workers who report concerns. But Grace's story reminds us that these protections are only as strong as the people who are willing to use them. Progress in medical ethics requires constant vigilance and the courage to act when we see wrongdoing. Grace Holloway's legacy extends far beyond the walls of Mercy General Hospital. Her story has been shared at medical conferences, published in nursing journals, and included in textbooks on medical ethics. She has become a symbol of the nurse as patient advocate, the healthcare professional who puts moral principles above personal safety or career advancement. The transformation of Room 407 from a place of fear and unrest to a memorial of hope and healing represents something profound about the power of truth and acknowledgement. When we honor those who have suffered injustice, when we tell their stories and learn from their experiences, we create the possibility for healing and redemption. Grace's spirit found peace not through supernatural intervention, but through the simple act of having her story told and her sacrifice recognized. As I conclude this account, I want to emphasize that the events I have described are not merely a ghost story or a tale of supernatural phenomena. They are a testament to the enduring power of moral conviction, the importance of professional ethics, and the responsibility we all bear to protect those who are vulnerable and voiceless. Grace Holloway's story challenges us to examine our own practices, our own willingness to speak up when we see wrongdoing, and our own commitment to the principles that should guide healthcare. Her legacy reminds us that being a healthcare professional is not just a job, but a calling to heal, to protect, to advocate, and to ensure that the trust patients place in us is never betrayed. The darkest thing I witnessed during my first night as an ICU nurse was not a ghostly apparition or a supernatural manifestation. It was the realization that healthcare professionals, people sworn to do no harm, had deliberately harmed vulnerable patients and then covered up their crimes. But in that darkness, I also found light, the light of truth finally revealed, of justice finally served, and of a courageous nurse's legacy finally honored. Grace Holloway's story is now part of my story, and through me, it becomes part of the stories of all the patients I care for and all the nurses I mentor. Her spirit lives on, not as a restless ghost haunting a hospital room, but as an inspiration to all healthcare professionals to uphold the highest standards of ethical practice and to never forget that our first duty is always to those we serve. In the end, that is perhaps the most important lesson of all, that the dead can teach the living, that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes to emerge, will always find a way to set us free. Grace Holloway waited over a century for her story to be told, but her patience was rewarded, her sacrifice was honored, and her legacy will endure for generations to come.